So let's talk about compassion. As we talk about compassion, it is true that I didn't speak about this at Red River because that's what they assigned, and I'm speaking about it here because that's what they assigned. Tim and I actually talked to each other at Red River and talked about what he had in mind for this lesson, and I think he shared it with the committee here, and so I'm glad to give it. It's kind of hard to give in some ways because we're going to talk about some things that are sometimes difficult to discuss about compassion, but nonetheless, we're going to do that today. All right, so compassion, especially as shown through benevolence, is a pivotal concept for the millennials. Who are those dudes? Born since 1983. Now the preferred term is millennial. I used to be teaching that they were postmodern, and that would be the period of time since 1973. So if you were born since 1973, I guess you could be postmodern. But now the millennials are technically those that are born since 1983. And by the way, I get that from the business community, not the church. You know, if you ask McDonald's and some of those guys who are the millennials, that'd be the 1983 group. Also the weirdos who go to Panera Bread and Starbucks and overpay for food. Okay, and so the reason why I don't like, to go to Starbucks is I ain't going to pay $10 for a latte grande or your mama a. I'm not going to pay $10 for any of that kind of stuff. And I ain't going to go to Panera Bread because you're going to be hungry in 20 minutes after you eat there. All right, and so whenever you think about this, that is the millennials. But there are some concerns about that. The millennials think as a whole that the churches of Christ have not been as benevolent as we should be. They think as a whole that we have missed the mission of Christ. They think that somehow or another, we've worked so much about getting doctrine correct and being accurate and all that stuff that somehow or another we've not been as benevolent as we should. I don't know, Tommy, exactly where all this is coming from, but I get the message from OC kids and from Harding kids and from Freed kids and Faulkner kids and other places, so I know that generation somehow or another thinks that we failed in some ways in missing the center part of the gospel. And one of those areas is benevolence. Now, in talking about this, by the way, let me also say this to you. I am not about to say that we have failed in every way. And I also want you to understand that I know that a lot of people in church do benevolent things for people in church that will never be known by even the eldership. A lot of that is not quantifiable. We cannot, measure all the good things that our people do for people all the time. This random dude at the airport last night at Alamo is a member of the church at Estes Park, I believe he said, and he gave me a pretty good deal, maybe, okay, on a rental car. And then I'm kind of thinking, well, that's pretty neat to meet a brother right here at the airport in OKC. So that was pretty neat too. So it was Bob Dylan. The reason I have his lyrics up here is because I've never understood a word that he said when he sang it. All right, come gather round, people, wherever you roam, and admit that the waters around you have grown, and accept that soon you'll be drenched to the bone. It's your time to you. If the time to you is worth saving, then you better start swimming or you'll sink like a stone, for the times, they are indeed a-changing. All right, so a Google search recently indicated an immense popularity in social justice and peace and trying to help this fallen world, as the argument goes. All right, we live in the fallen world, and therefore we need to be helping people in a benevolent way. World Mission Workshop, for instance, used to be pretty heavily on the doctrine side of getting together and talking to missionaries about doctrinal things. Now, and by the way, this is a need, but now they get together at Harding and when you learn how to do vocational ministry. You learn how to help people to build buildings and to do hygiene and how to live in a counter environment and all of that stuff, a counterculture. All of that is needed, by the way. It is necessary to have all of that. But you see, the pendulum has swung on one side from let's go out there and teach them the gospel to let's go out there and just do good things for them. Let's build houses for them and let's educate the children. And by the way, this is not either or. This is both and. But for some reason or another, this generation seems to feel that there are ways in which we have not been as benevolent as we should be. And so, if you do just a little Google search, you get 48,600,000 results if you just type in Centers for Social Justice. They have, at least at 3 of our sister schools, there are centers of social justice there. I know that they are there at Lipscomb and Pepperdine, and I think at Abilene as well. All right, so whenever you think about these centers for social justice, I'm not saying that they're a bad thing, but I am saying that somehow or another we need to either be more compassionate or to communicate to others that we are. Because the word compassion is a strange word. It's the word eusplaxnoi. Okay, or splaxizomai, if you like the verb form. All right, but it means bowels. Okay, you think, well, why does compassion mean bowels? Because the Greeks thought that was the center, most important part, and therefore it came from deep down inside of you, Jeremy. Now, my wife had surgery September the 18th. And part of that surgery is that she got an infection from the cancer surgery that she had. And so they opened a midline incision there to let out some infection. And they tried to train Ralph how to change that wound. And let me just tell you, I have a whole nother outlook on bowels now. Because I'm just kind of thinking to you, man, that's, no. Okay, I don't want to do that. But you will. Why? Because you have limits on home health care. Okay, and so you do that kind of stuff. But whenever you look, what do you see? Compassion is down, way down in your bowels. Therefore, the very word means bowels. Although I don't believe that we have not been compassionate in the past, a heart for the next generation makes it a topic that's very important to them. Became interested in postmodernism, essentially in 1993, because in 1994, I had a discussion about this with Randy Harris and with Jim Walters in 94 about how the changing culture was going to affect the way that we interpret the Bible. In other words, hermeneutics. And I don't think much of anybody then in 1994 thought that it was going to be such a big deal. And now the year is 2015, and it is a big deal. Okay, it is really a big deal because culture has changed, as Dan was indicating in the last lecture, that things have changed a lot because of the way that culture has changed around us. So 1 Chronicles 12:32, try to understand what's going on. Unity begins with the head, not the heart. You cannot have unity with the heart alone because the heart does not know what to do without direction from the head. As my mother used to say about my daddy, my dad would say, by the way, your daddy is, she would say about my daddy, your daddy is, by the way, the head of the house, but I am the neck and I turn the head whichever way I want to go. Well, okay, so is there a need for head? Yes. Is there a need for heart? Of course. Reasoning and emotions. But the emotions don't know where to go without direction from the head. So the sons of Issachar were men who understood their times and knew what Israel should do. Understanding the times, you know what Israel should do. All around you at Oklahoma City, things are changing in the churches of Christ. Everywhere that you go, the story's about the same if they have many churches of Christ there. About everywhere that you go, things are changing dramatically. So the point then is, what do you do about it? Well, one thing that you want to do is to understand that unity has got to begin with the head. I'm not going to get deeply into this, but this weekend is a wonderful weekend for kids in the Church of Christ Our Way because it's CYC. It's the Challenge Youth Conference in Gatlinburg where are going to have about 12,000 people. You know, they're going to have some weather as well, but about 12,000 kids and chaperones. But unfortunately, the week before that, there was Winterfest. And Winterfest is associated with the Churches of Christ as well. And they're going to have about 12,000 people. And so I'm wondering, what do the people in East Tennessee think about the Churches of Christ? Because there's about 12,000 kids, that meet for this one gathering. And then the next week, there's going to be another 12,000 kids or so they're going to meet for the other gathering. And they're going to wonder, how in the world is it possible to reconcile all of that? Because there are Winterfest churches and there are CYC churches where I'm from. I imagine there are parallels here in Oklahoma. But it's, you go to this one, or this congregation goes here, this congregation goes there. You know what I'd like to see? A possibility of reconciliation. I'd like to see a possibility of getting back together, but it won't be possible without there being the desire in the head first that leads to the heart that we should be together. Now, again, it could be just a fool's dream that we should even think that we could still stay together in the churches of Christ. But I happen to believe that we could do it. That there would be a way for us to do this without admitting that indeed there is an unofficial split among us already. Benevolence softens the way for evangelism. Illustration, Tom's shoes. You know what Tom's shoes are? Well, that's something that I have bought for my children. Some of them want those canvas shoes that come from Tom's. They're made out of canvas. They cost about $80 and they're worth about $8. Okay, and why is it that they want Tom's shoes? Well, because whoever Tom is going to take some of the money from that shoe purchase and he's going to provide shoes to people in impoverished areas in Africa and other places. And my kids like that. Well, yeah, you should like it. I'm paying $60 more for those shoes than I should be paying for them. And by the way, we even bought Tom's shoes for a 3-year-old. They're good about 30 minutes. And then they outgrow them. But what is that? Well, I guess it's benevolence. They really like the benevolence. And so, number 3, share Jesus, not just the facts, but who Jesus is in relationship with Jesus. So how can you be more compassionate? Well, I'm a head-oriented sort of guy. I like logic. I'm teaching critical thinking now to about 16 students at Freed-Hardeman. Well, about 14. 2 of them are kind of marginal. Okay, but I have several students at Freed-Hardeman right now who are taking critical thinking. And I'm kind of thinking, Casey, I had you in class, as a matter of fact. Okay, and so it's as you think about this. Now that means, you know what that means? While the time I'm teaching logic, that means I'm probably going to have more arguments in my house than if I'm not teaching logic. Because why? Well, because I'm telling the students to watch out not to use words all or no when you mean some. So when your wife says to you, you say that all the time. Then I go into this logic discussion, and she is not impressed. Okay, all right, so we've been married 43 years, so you have to be careful about this. By the way, women are very logical, and I have a daughter who teaches Algebra 2, and she's very smart in math and all that kind of stuff. But let me tell you, being compassionate doesn't necessarily come easy for some of us. How do you develop that inner feeling? How do you develop that? Well, let's talk some more about that today. There's no easy answers. But part of it has to do with understanding your own brokenness. David Wright, I love you, brother. Heard your speech today on Joseph, and you were talking about how brokenness had affected the life of Joseph and had put him in an environment where God could use him. The story is repeated in virtually every successful Bible character in the Bible. I guess that's where the Bible characters are. Okay, but nonetheless, whenever you think about them, and that is brokenness. Well, in 1992, the year was pretty good. Because I'd been a preacher, taught at Freed-Hardeman for 11 years, doing what I wanted to do. Life was good, and everything was fine until the opening of the fall semester of that year. And I was called out to say that my sister was taken to the hospital. She had a minor illness that had been 11 days earlier noted by a doctor, and she died 22 days later from a very aggressive form of cancer. She was 56 years old. And that's the first time it occurred to me that maybe I was perceiving that God had somehow or another built a hedge around me, like Satan said to God about Job. And so you got this hedge around you that I have one sister, no brothers, and she was 13 years older than me and absolutely a wonderful, trusted, great friend, except she was taken away in 33 days. And then to the very day, my mother dies 3 months after that. All the same semester, all the time I'm trying to teach Christian evidences, all the time I'm trying to teach problem of evil and why, bad things happen to good people and all that stuff. And it was just way too real in my life. And then in 1993, it occurred to me, wow, there's no hedge around me. There's no hedge around me just because I've chosen to be a preacher or other things. It's not there. That thing, it just came tumbling down like a bunch of bricks with dried out mortar between them. It's just crashed. And so in 93, I thought, well, I've made it now through that. But what we didn't understand at that time is that was my daughter's senior year. And her favorite aunt was my sister. And she began to feel some feelings of inadequacy and inferiority, being unable to deal with some of the things that she'd done. As far as I know, Andy, she never drank when she went to Freed-Hardeman. At the time she went to Freed-Hardeman. But at the time she went to Freed-Hardeman, she found some friends who like to drink, because you can find it. Some friends at Freed-Hardeman or OC that want to drink if you want to drink. If that's what you want, you can find them there. And so she found some, and quickly her situation degenerated into sheer, full-blown, nasty, ugly alcoholism. I mean, you got the accelerator, like coming from the airport last night. It is true. You don't often see people going 30 miles an hour on I-40 or 44 or whatever it is. Okay, you don't often see that, but boy, you saw it last night. Because people are going slow. You know what the alcoholism is? You can't adjust the accelerator. When it's on, it's fully on, and the only way to stop it is to turn it off. You cannot go 30 miles an hour because my daughter quickly accelerated to the point that she was drinking stuff that was 120 proof, which is 60% alcohol. Everclear, if you've ever heard of that. Vodka, some of that stuff is over 100% and over 100 proof, and that would be about 50% alcohol. And so that happened with my daughter. Then at that time, why? Well, because my sister died when she was a senior in high school, and she thought that God hated her. She really did think that God hated her. Why would she feel that way? Why, do you know how many years we had kids at Jackson Christian School for 26 years? Our kids are all spread out. We never knew what caused that. But our kids are all spread out. And we had kids for that long there. How in the world? I just know that from a personal viewpoint, I was learning a lot about brokenness because getting in and out of the pulpit was increasingly difficult for me, having nothing to do with increased age. It's just that I didn't want to get up there and do it. I didn't want to do it. So I tried to resign, from Freed Hardeman. Tried to resign from Campbell Street, where I was at the time. And instead, the elders tried something unusual. We had 12 elders at the time. The Lord had blessed us, so the church had really grown. We had 12 elders at the time. I think that 10 of them were there on that Sunday night. And they all got up and prayed that Satan would not have our daughter. So I'm learning. And what we're learning is, God doesn't use just your strengths. He uses your weaknesses. 2 Corinthians 12. So when we thought about that, we thought, I don't know, it just still seems not right that you should have a daughter, not just who's in drugs and alcohol for 7 years, but she was in prison for 2 years and about 77 days. And during that time, let me just tell you that you are broken a little more whenever the call time is for your at the prison or the jail, wherever your child is, or your wife, or you, for that matter. We're all broken. And you can't wait until the time that you can get that one phone call a week or one phone call every 3 days. And you know what that time is. And you know that it's going to ring about that time of the evening, every evening. And you look at your wife and your wife looks at you and you say, who's going to take this call? Because I really don't think that I can do it tonight. Because you know what it's going to be. It's going to be, talking about the fact that, I'm so sorry and I'm going to cry and weep and all that kind of stuff. And please, can you send me some stuff that I can't get here in prison and all that stuff? And you had to go through that mess. So sometimes my wife would feel that she was able to do it, and sometimes I would feel that I was able to do it, and sometimes neither one of us wanted to take the phone call. Because this is 2 years of stuff. This is 2 years of stuff, and then you're saying, I don't know how you got here. By the way, she is adopted. But that's okay, because Superman was adopted. Okay, but he was adopted. The 2 youngest ones are adopted. One was 5 weeks old, and the other was 7 weeks old. But I learned a little bit more about brokenness and about compassion. Because in a head-oriented world, it's difficult to get your heart straight. It is difficult to do that. I'm going to give you the companion side to what Dan said. I didn't really plan this. But Dan was talking about the fact that indeed we are hurt by the onslaught of the gay activists who are limiting our freedoms and that we've got to fight and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But here's the other side of that. Can those people with same-sex attraction in your congregation feel that they even have anybody to talk to? Probably, if your congregation is big enough, you got people with same-sex attraction in it. And if you say to yourself, oh, no, well, we got to, it is true that the practice of homosexuality is sinful. There's no question about it. 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 9, Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 32, Leviticus 21, and a bunch of other places. On the other hand, do they feel as though, if they are non-practicing and they still have same-sex attraction, do they feel as though they could worship with your congregation. Now, I didn't say they were practicing, did I? I said that they had same-sex attraction, but they were not practicing. They knew they were struggling. And is there anybody there who's trying to be sympathetic to them? Is there anybody there that's trying to be sympathetic to those single mothers? Oh, yes, they sinned. They really did. They got, oh, by the way, somebody else sinned too. Besides the mother who is pregnant, somebody else sinned along with her. You know, that single mother, somebody else sinned along with her. And it seems as though we spend a lot of time making sure, when I was a kid, that somebody in my high school that got pregnant, she was kind of, I don't know, flown away to another state or something. We never saw her anymore. But the guy seemed to be able to stay there okay. I mean, the father of the unborn child was okay. The father of the unborn child is not okay. But on the other hand, do you understand? Do you have any compassion? Can you be moved with balance of compassion towards somebody who would make a decision that you think that you would never make under any circumstances whatsoever? And by the way, you might be wrong. And when you talk about these sorts of things, it is a spirituality of brokenness that we're talking about here. Therefore, people who have been broken seem to understand this better than people who don't. Now, if you've never been broken, I'm not saying that you have to be, but I'm going to tell you that if you indicate something like this, there will be somebody after service that will say, I think it's safe to talk to you. I think it's okay to talk to you. Because otherwise, you are just a preacher dude. And everything was fine, you know. You got 2 cars in the garage and your children are obedient and your dog is beautiful. I mean, you know, everything is perfect with you and your nice little family. But if you indicate that you've been broken, somebody will want to talk to you. Why? Because they don't want to talk to somebody who doesn't understand. And so the Friday night after lectureship, it happened to be our daughter's 15th anniversary in Alcoholics Anonymous. 15 years. 7 years on drugs, 15 years off of drugs. Now, this is a kick in the britches. She can even teach state classes on DUI, you know, for those people that are caught with driving under the influence, and now she can teach those. And, you know, my wife and I sometimes kind of laugh about that. Well, you ought to be able to teach it. You were pretty good at it. Okay, but anyway, the point is that now she gets to do that. And now she's a drug and alcohol addiction counselor by the grace of God. So when we went to her AA meeting, it was an open meeting, and others could go. You know, she began to talk about things that made a difference in her life and continue to make a difference in her life. She has a husband now and a wonderful grandchild named Hudson, named after her granddaddy on Joyce's side of the family, and everything is pretty good. But if you don't indicate that you understand something about addiction or about chronic situations, then people will not talk to you because you're one of those people who doesn't get it. You're one of those people who has not been broken. But if you've been broken, maybe you understand a little better. Father, forgive them of their sins as they are willing to forgive others. In Psalm 51, the sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. O God, you will not despise. Part of it means you need to recognize the fact that you are a sinner, which means automatically you're broken. If you're not a sinner, you can say you've never been broken. If you say you've never been broken, I guess you're really saying you're just really not a sinner. But if you are a sinner, you have been broken. Therefore, having compassion on your own brokenness means I came to understand, as they would say in AA terms, okay, I'm going to give you just the first 3 of the 12 steps. The first step is I'm powerless over alcohol and my life has become unmanageable. Now let's say instead of alcohol, sin. I'm powerless over sin and my life has become unmanageable. Number 2, came to understand. Came to understand what? That God, the higher power, that my higher power could help me in ways that I could not help myself. Number 3, came to submit to the higher power. That's your first 3 steps. And in AA, they're called I can't, he can, I will. That's where brokenness starts for all of us. By the way, as far as I can see, the 12 steps of Bill and Bob come from the Bible. So when you talk about understanding your own brokenness and finding meaning in it, moving on its area, there's a book by Terry Taylor. All right, Mark Buchanan wrote in his book, Your God is Too Safe, that there is one soil that usually withers pride. It's brokenness. Brokenness molds our character closer to the character of God than anything else. To experience defeat, disappointment, loss, the raw ingredients of brokenness moves us closer to being like God than victory and gain and fulfillment ever can. Gary Rossberg said, an evangelical thinker, an unbroken person cannot be trusted. Why? Because they don't really understand where you have been. God will never plant the seed of his life upon the soil of a hard, unbroken spirit. He will only plant that seed where the conviction of his Spirit has brought brokenness, where the soil has been watered with the tears of repentance as well as the tears of joy. Alan Redpath. Many Hebrew words for grieving come from the word distill, meaning, okay, there's some impurities there, and how am I going to get rid of some of the impurities in my life? It's going to be painful. There's no way you can get around it. Like when a doctor says to you, this is going to hurt a little bit, that means hold on tight. Okay, because this is going to hurt a little bit, because there's no way to get over your brokenness without understanding and coming to terms with some pain that is there. Next, Paul's writings bring light to the phenomenon of a servant's heart being born. In Galatians 4:19, I checked this just before the lecture over lunch. This word's only used one time in the Bible. Therefore, it's a hapax legomenon. But it's the word there for being formed in us, and it is kind of akin to that word for grieving. In other words, laboring and being formed. Let Christ being formed in you sometimes is agonizomai. That's another word for agony. Sometimes it takes a lot of this in order for Christ to be formed in us as we should. And there's lamenting and mourning. You will see that in Eastern cultures more than Western cultures, because we're men. What do? Well, my dad was a man, and what men do is that they chew iron and spit out nails. You got some tough guys here in Oklahoma, don't you? Okay, because you're tough. I got 5 minutes. Are you serious? Okay, and so when we talk about that, it means, wow, okay. So how do I make myself vulnerable? I make myself vulnerable by indicating I'm not really that person who's not touched by your feelings. Maybe for this reason, God gave us 4 daughters. Why? Because we don't want 5. Okay, but we have these 4 daughters, and they have this habit of talking sometimes to mom and dad. And sometimes they would say to dad, Dad, I don't want you to do anything about this. I want you to listen. Why? Because men are fix it. And women are feel it. Women know how to fix it. And some men know how to feel it, but I'm talking in generalities here. And so my daughters would say to me, Dad, I don't want you to shoot the guy. I don't want you to run over him in a car. I don't want you to do anything. I want you to just listen to me, please. Okay. You know you're tying my hands because I'm a guy. All right. And then she'll tell me what's on her mind. It's not easy sometimes. You don't want to hear the hurt from your children. And you can't protect them from all the things in the world that you would like to protect them from. So when we think about the passages that I won't be able to get to much, let's look at least at the 3 main points. And that is the 3 passages on brokenness. 2 Corinthians 7 and verse 10. For the sorrow that is according to the will of God produces a repentance without regret, leading to salvation. Godly sorrow leads to repentance. Can there be any such thing as repentance without it? Being godly broken. I am broken. Number 2, James 4, 6 through 10. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hearts, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Be wretched and mourn and weep. Because here in the Western culture, we have a difficult time doing that because men are not supposed to do that. What would you have done in a Western culture if the elders from the area of Miletus had fallen on your neck and kissed you? Whoa! Stay away from me. Oh, by the way, that would be Acts 20, 29 and 30. And so another indication of brokenness that we see is Philippians 2, verses 5 through 8. Let this mind be in you, which is also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, thought it not robbery equal to God, made himself of no reputation, took on the form of a servant, made in the likeness of man, being found. He humbled himself, and became obedient to the cross, even the death of the cross, which of course indicates that Jesus was broken, but not because of his sin. He was broken for you and for me because he was surrogate broken. He had no sin, but he made himself to be broken because of you and me. And so, how does all this factor in the little time that we have here? Well, Jesus cried while he was on earth. I'm going to have to flip through some things here. To deliver me from, why is it that I need to understand my brokenness? That Jesus wanted to deliver me from sin and self and the law. To heal me from the pain of traumatic abuse. To manifest more of his character in me. To manifest more of his unique person. There's my bride. That's on our wedding day, 1971. Kind of looks like her mother. This is the first time I've been away from her since September the 18th. I'm thinking about her right now. Why? Well, we've shared some stuff together. We flush her IV every night. We give her fluid every 5 days or so. And we helped that stupid wound to heal. It took 2.5 months, but it healed. And so we go through this stuff together. Even the home health people said, I surely should be getting at least an associate degree in nursing by now, because of all the stuff that you have to do. But my goodness, 43 years, what has she done for me? How many times has she been there for me? It's like the guy that went to the nursing home and his wife had Alzheimer's and she didn't know him. But he came regularly all the time. And so the nurses would say to him, I don't understand why you're so regular in coming. She doesn't know who you are. But he said, I know who she is. It seems to me that in the time ahead, the churches of Christ are at a pivotal spot. If we cannot show more of the compassion that is asked us of God, then the young people will become increasingly, it seems to me, diverted to look for other sources, because they would rather go to a church that is benevolent, that uses the piano, than go to a congregation that sings a cappella and seems cold and austere. They would rather go to a church where they are jumping for Jesus, and whether or not they partake of the Lord's Supper on Sunday, and maybe they'll have a woman in the pulpit, I do not know. They would rather do that than go to a congregation where they feel that people are going through the motions of Christianity. Tim, you and I talked about this. Going through the motions of Christianity. So it behooves us to listen. I'm not saying that you haven't been compassionate, but I'm saying that we've got to communicate it better to the millennials that are coming along if we want to reach them, because by and large, as a whole, they think that many of us don't have a heart.